Keitha stood at the edge of her flying castle, her silver hair blowing in the wind. Blue lightning danced between her fingers like tiny snakes made of light. Far below, she could see the broken world, big chunks of land floating in empty sky, held together by bridges made of her lightning magic. She was the last storm maker. Her job was to keep all the floating lands connected so they wouldn't drift away into nothing. It was lonely work that she had to do by herself, day after day, year after year. The wind was strong today, making her long coat snap behind her like a flag. She watched the people walking on the crystal bridges she had made, going from one floating island to another. They looked so small from up here, like ants. Sometimes she wished she could walk among them, talk to them, maybe even find someone to love. But storm makers had to stay alone. That was the rule. She was thinking about this when something impossible happened. Someone was climbing the secret stairs carved into the bottom of her castle. Keitha blinked hard. The stairs were hidden in the empty air below her home. No one should be able to see them, and even if they could, the magic winds around them would kill anyone who tried to climb up. But there was a man in a dark coat, moving up the stone steps like the deadly winds were just a soft breeze. Her hand went to the lightning sword on her belt. She had never seen anyone like this man before. His coat wasn't just black, it seemed to eat the light around it, making him hard to look at straight on. And she could feel strange power coming from him, different from any magic she knew. When he finally reached the top and stepped onto her castle, she saw his eyes. They were purple like the night sky, with tiny silver stars that seemed to move and dance in the dark. "Lady Stormmaker," he said, and his voice sounded like music made of bells and wind. "I bring bad news from the shadow courts. The hungry ones have broken free from their prison." The words hit her like a punch. Keitha's lightning power shook and almost went out. She had to grab onto her magic tight to keep it from falling apart. The hungry ones were monsters from the old stories, things that ate whole worlds. "That can't be true," she said, her voice small in the big wind. "The magic locks can only be opened by a storm maker and a void walker working together," the man said, finishing her words. "That's why I'm here. We need each other, Keitha Stormborn. If we don't work together to make new locks, the hungry ones will eat everything." She stared at him. A void walker. She should have known from the way light bent around him, from the strange music in his voice. Void walkers were from the old stories, dark magic users who could step through empty space and bend shadows to their will. They were supposed to be gone, dead for hundreds of years, but here one stood in front of her, and he knew her name. "I don't even know what to call you," she said. "Darien Void Walker," he said with a small bow. "Last son of the House of Never-Ending Night, and right now the only thing standing between your flying islands and complete death." Even with all the scary things he was saying, Keitha almost smiled. "You think pretty well of yourself." "I don't have time to be humble." Darien stepped closer, and she could feel his power brush against hers like cold wind. It made her shiver, but not in a bad way. "The first hungry one breaks free in 7 days. After that, more will follow. By the end of the month, there will be many of them loose between your islands, eating everything they touch." Keitha closed her eyes and reached out with her storm magic to feel the power that connected all the floating lands. For just a second, she thought she felt something wrong, like one bad note in a song. "Show me," she said. Darien held out his hand, and shadows began to pool in his palm like thick black water. But these shadows had depth and seemed to move on their own, swirling with colors that had no real names. In the shadow pool, a picture began to form. Keitha saw the empty space between the floating lands, the place that should have been empty except for the magic framework that held their broken world together. But now that framework had cracks, and through the cracks, something was coming in. The hungry ones were not ugly like she had thought they would be. They were beautiful in a strange way, like living art made from pure hunger. They moved through empty space with smooth grace, their shapes changing as they reached out with arms that existed in more places than her eyes could see. But they were still monsters. Where they touched the magic power that held the lands together, that power just stopped being there, not broken or changed, but gone like it had never existed at all. By the first storm, Keitha whispered as she watched one of the things touch a piece of her lightning magic. The energy didn't explode or fade away, it just stopped being real, leaving behind a hole in the world that hurt to look at. The first magic locks were made during the Great Breaking, Darian said, making the vision go away with a wave of his hand. My people and yours worked together to trap these things before they could eat the pieces of our broken world. But the locks were never meant to last forever. They've been getting weaker for hundreds of years. And now they're breaking. Keitha felt cold. That had nothing to do with the wind. How long do we have? 7 days until the first one gets completely free. After that, the others will break free faster and faster. The locks were all connected. When one breaks, the others get much weaker. She looked at his face, trying to see if he was lying. Void walkers were famous for being good at lies, for making false things sound more true than real things. But his strange purple eyes held no tricks, only fear that seemed real. The magic ritual needs us to trust each other completely, she said, remembering old stories passed down through her family. Our powers have to work together without either of us trying to control the other. One mistake and we'll destroy each other. Darian stepped even closer, close enough that she could see the tiny lines of silver light that moved through his purple eyes like cracks filled with starlight. Then we better learn to trust each other fast. For a long time, they just stood there, two people with great power looking at each other like careful cats. The wind howled around them, bringing smells of faraway forests and the sharp smell of her lightning. But Keitha was very aware of Darian being close to her. He smelled like midnight and silver bells, like the time between sleeping and waking when dreams feel more real than real life. You're not telling me something, she said finally. Even if we succeed in making new magic locks, even if we trap all the hungry ones, what happens after? You said I was the last storm maker, but you're clearly not the last void walker. Why did your people send you alone? Darian's face became carefully blank, which was answer enough. They didn't send you, did they? Keitha continued. You came by yourself. The Shadow Courts think that the breaking of the magic locks can't be stopped, he admitted. Their plan is to hide in the deepest shadows, in the spaces between spaces where even hungry ones can't reach, and wait for the creatures to get tired of eating this world, and then come out to rule whatever's left. Keitha nodded sadly. That sounds like the Shadow Courts. I couldn't accept that. Darian's voice carried pain that seemed real. These lands, these people, they don't deserve to die for my people's survival. And besides, he looked away, his eyes traveling across the view of floating islands. There are things here worth saving. Beauty that exists nowhere else in all the empty spaces and shadows I've walked. Something in the way he said it made Keitha's breath catch. She followed his gaze, seeing her world through his eyes, the impossible waterfalls that became mist and then rain for islands far below, the crystal bridges that carried light and power and music between the flying cities. The way the eternal stars painted everything in silver and gold and deep purple shadows. You've traveled between worlds before, she said. I've walked in the spaces between spaces since I was old enough to control my power. I've seen realities where up is down, places where thoughts become real things, worlds where time moves in circles instead of straight lines. His eyes found hers again. But I've never seen anywhere as beautiful as this. As beautiful as. He stopped talking, but Keitha felt her face get warm anyway. There was something in the way he looked at her, a strength that had nothing to do with magic power and everything to do with the oldest force in any world. We should start training right away, she said, her voice a little breathless. If we only have 7 days. Yes. Darian's voice had become rough. We should. But neither of them moved. The practice room was deep inside Keitha's castle, carved from one huge crystal that had fallen from empty space during the Great Breaking. The walls glowed with their own inner light, responding to magic energy like bells respond to sound. This was where storm makers came to practice their most dangerous magic, protected by layers of safety spells that could handle almost anything. Keitha hoped those protections would be enough. She stood at one end of the oval room, her lightning sword drawn and crackling with trapped electricity. The weapon had been made by her great-grandmother from crystallized thunder and hardened in the heart of a hurricane. It was more than just a sword, it was a way to focus her power, to aim and direct the wild energies that flowed through her blood. At the other end of the room, Darian held no weapon. She could see. Instead, shadows pooled around his feet like liquid midnight, and the air around him shimmered like heat waves. He had taken off his coat, showing a lean, strong body clothed in tight black that seemed to drink up the crystal room's light. The basic idea is simple, Keitha called across the space between them, trying not to stare at the way his shoulders moved under the dark cloth. Lightning looks for the easiest path. Your void magic should be able to create channels that my power can follow. In theory, Darian replied, his voice echoing strangely in the crystal space. In practice, your lightning will try to fill any void I create, and my shadows will try to swallow any light you make. We're natural enemies, Keitha. Our magic types have been at war for thousands of years. She knew he was right. Every instinct she had screamed at her to attack this creature of darkness, even as another part of her was drawn to the beautiful complexity of his power. Storm makers and void walkers had fought across the skies for so long that the hatred was built into their very magic. Then we'll have to overcome thousands of years of instinct in less than a week, she said grimly. The old stories say it can be done. There were bonded pairs before, storm makers and void walkers who learned to work together. And what happened to them? Darian asked. Keitha was quiet for a moment. The stories don't say. They just stop talking about them after the bonding. How comforting. Despite everything, she found herself smiling. Ready to try? Darian nodded and raised his hands. Shadows began to flow from his fingers like smoke, but thicker and darker than any natural darkness. The shadows moved with purpose, reaching across the room toward her like living things. Keitha raised her sword and let lightning flow down the blade. The electricity was eager, hungry to jump across the gap and strike at the approaching darkness. She had to fight every instinct to hold it back, to let it move slowly and carefully instead of lashing out in a killing strike. The moment her lightning touched his shadows, pain exploded through both of them. Keitha screamed and stumbled backward as what felt like ice-cold needles stabbed into her brain. Across the room, Darian fell to his knees, his hands pressed to his head as silver fire seemed to burn across his skin. Stop, he gasped. Pull back. She yanked her lightning back so hard that sparks flew from her sword and scorched the crystal walls. Darian's shadows snapped back to him like rubber bands, leaving them both gasping on opposite sides of the room. Well, Keitha panted, wiping blood from her nose. That went better than I expected. Darian looked up at her with surprise, then started laughing. It was a rich, warm sound that filled the crystal chamber with music. Better than you expected? We nearly killed each other. Yes, but we're both still alive, she pointed out, and we made contact. That's progress. He shook his head, still smiling. You're insane. I'm optimistic. There's a difference. She walked closer, offering him a hand up. What did you feel when our powers touched? Darian took her hand, and the moment their skin met, both of them froze. The same pain was there, but underneath it was something else, a resonance, a harmony that felt almost right. I felt, he said slowly, not letting go of her hand, like coming home, like finding the other half of something I didn't know was broken. Keitha nodded, her heart beating fast. Me too. The pain is just because our magic doesn't know how to fit together yet. But there's something there, Darian. Something that wants to connect. They stood there for a moment, hands clasped, feeling the strange push and pull of their opposing powers. Her lightning wanted to flow into his darkness, while his shadows seemed to reach for her light like flowers reaching for the sun. "We need to go slower," Darian said finally. "Start smaller. Maybe if we can get our magic used to touching in tiny amounts, like learning to dance," Keith agreed. "You start with simple steps before you try the complicated moves." They spent the rest of the day practicing tiny connections, a single spark of her lightning touching a wisp of his shadow, a small tendril of his darkness wrapping around a thin stream of her electricity. Each contact brought pain, but less each time, and underneath the pain, that sense of rightness grew stronger. By evening, they could maintain a connection for several seconds before the opposing forces of their magic tore it apart. It wasn't much, but it was progress. "How do you feel?" Keitha asked as they sat on opposite sides of the room, both too drained to stand. "Like I've been beaten with hammers," Darian replied honestly, "but also lighter somehow. Like I've been carrying a weight I didn't know was there, and it's finally starting to lift." She knew exactly what he meant. Her lightning had always been wild, chaotic, hard to control, but when it touched his shadows, it seemed to find new patterns, new ways to flow that felt more natural than anything she'd ever experienced. "The old stories talk about balance," she said thoughtfully. "Light needs darkness to have meaning. Storms need calm spaces to move through. Maybe that's what we're finding, not two separate powers, but two halves of something bigger." Darian was quiet for a long moment. "Keitha," he said finally, "there's something else you should know about the bonding ritual." Something in his tone made her look at him more carefully. "What?" "It's not just about magic. The ancient texts are clear to achieve perfect harmony between Stormmaker and Voidwalker. The bond has to be complete, physical as well as magical." Heat flooded her cheeks as she understood what he was saying. "You mean?" "I mean we have to become lovers," he said bluntly. "Our bodies have to be joined as well as our powers. It's the only way to achieve the level of trust and connection needed to forge new void locks." Keitha stared at him, her mind racing. She had lived alone for 30 years, had never allowed herself to even think about romance or physical intimacy. Stormmakers were supposed to be above such things, devoted only to their duty. But looking at Darian now, seeing the way the crystal light played across his strong features, feeling the memory of his power touching hers, she realized that part of her had been hoping he would say exactly that. "How long do we have to decide?" she asked quietly. "The bonding has to happen before we face the first hungry one," he replied. "So 5 days, maybe 6 at most. After that, it will be too late. 5 days to overcome a lifetime of solitude. 5 days to learn to trust someone completely. 5 days to fall in love with a man who was supposed to be her natural enemy. Then we better keep practicing," she said, standing up on shaky legs. "Both kinds of practice." Darian's eyes widened slightly at the implication in her voice, but he nodded and got to his feet as well. "Both kinds," he agreed. As they left the practice room together, Keitha tried not to think about how little time they had. 5 days to save the world. 5 days to learn to work together. 5 days to discover if the growing warmth in her chest whenever she looked at him was real love or just the desperation of knowing they might all die. Either way, she was going to find out. The next 3 days passed in a blur of training, progress, and slowly building trust. Each morning, Keitha and Darian would meet in the crystal practice room to work on connecting their magic. Each evening, they would sit together on the castle balcony, talking and sharing meals while watching the sun set over the floating islands. Their magic was learning to dance together. Where before the contact between lightning and shadow had brought only pain, now there were moments of perfect harmony. Moments when her electricity would flow through his darkness like silver streams through black silk, creating patterns of impossible beauty. But it was their conversations that surprised Keitha the most. She had expected a void walker to be cold, cruel, maybe even evil. The old stories painted them as heartless creatures who cared nothing for anyone but themselves. But Darien was different. He was funny and kind, with a quick wit that made her laugh and a gentle way of speaking that made her feel safe. On the third evening, as they sat watching the stars come out in the eternal twilight sky, she finally worked up the courage to ask him about his past. What was it like, growing up in the shadow courts? She said, passing him a plate of the simple food she had prepared. Darien was quiet for a moment, his strange purple eyes distant. Cold, he said finally, not physically cold, but empty. The shadow courts value power above all else. Strength, control, the ability to take what you want without caring who gets hurt. I never fit in very well. Why not? He smiled, but it was a sad smile. Because I cared too much. Because I would see beauty in things that were supposed to be destroyed, find value in people who were supposed to be used and thrown away. My father said it was a weakness that would get me killed. Keitha set down her own plate and moved closer to him on the bench. It's not a weakness. It's what makes you good. The shadow courts don't value goodness. Then the shadow courts are fools. Darien looked at her, surprise clear on his face. You really believe that? I know it. She reached out and took his hand, ignoring the small sparks that jumped between their skin. You came here alone, against your people's wishes, to try to save a world that isn't even yours. You're risking everything for strangers. If that's not goodness, I don't know what is. His fingers tightened around hers. What about you? What was it like growing up as the last storm maker? Now it was Keitha's turn to be quiet. Lonely, she admitted. My grandmother died when I was 15, and after that, there was no one. Just me and the storms and the responsibility of keeping the islands connected. I used to dream about having a normal life, about being able to walk through the markets and talk to people without them being afraid of me. Are they afraid of you? Wouldn't you be? I could kill everyone on a floating island with a single lightning strike. I could cut the bridges between the lands and watch them drift away into nothing. They respect me, maybe even worship me a little, but they don't see me as a person, just as a force of nature and human shape. Darien was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I see you as a person. The simple words hit her harder than any lightning bolt. Keitha looked at him, really looked, and saw not fear or worship in his galaxy eyes, but something warm and real and entirely human. Darien, she whispered, Keitha. The space between them seemed to shrink without either of them moving. She could see every silver fleck in his purple irises, could feel the warmth of his breath on her face. Her heart was beating so fast she was sure he could hear it. Then his hand came up to cup her cheek, and she leaned into the touch without thinking. Where his skin met hers, tiny stars of silver light bloomed while dark flowers of shadow opened in response. Their magic was reacting to their closeness, but instead of the painful clash of before, it felt right, complete. We don't have to wait, she said softly. For the bonding ritual, I mean. We could, tonight if you want. Darien's thumb brushed across her cheekbone, leaving a trail of sparkling darkness. Are you sure? Once we're bonded, there's no going back. Our magic will be connected forever, across lifetimes, I'm sure. And she was, looking at him now, feeling the way her power reached for his like a flower reaching for sunlight. She couldn't imagine wanting anyone else. I've been alone for 30 years, Darien. I don't want to be alone anymore. His answer was to lean forward and kiss her. The moment their lips met, the world exploded into light and shadow. Keitha felt her lightning magic surge through her body. But instead of the wild, chaotic energy she was used to, it moved in new patterns, flowing through channels that Darien's darkness created in her very bones. At the same time, his void power poured into her, filling empty spaces in her soul that she hadn't even known existed. It should have destroyed them both. Lightning and shadow, storm and void, forces that had been enemies since the beginning of time. But instead of fighting, their powers began to dance, weaving together in spirals of silver and purple that painted the evening sky with aurora. When they finally broke apart, both of them were glowing. Keith's skin shimmered with internal lightning while Darian's seemed to hold depths of star-filled night. The air around them hummed with harmonics that made the crystal walls of her castle ring like bells. The bonding, Darian said, his voice rough with wonder. It's already started. Keith could feel it, two threads of connection forming between them, magical pathways that would allow their powers to flow back and forth like water finding its level. But more than that, she could feel him in her mind, his thoughts and emotions brushing against hers like whispered secrets. And what she felt from him was love. Real deep, overwhelming love that took her breath away. How? She whispered. How can you love me already? We've only known each other for 3 days. Darian smiled, and in the glow of their combined magic, he looked like a god of stars and midnight. Time doesn't matter when you find the other half of your soul, he said simply. I've been looking for you my whole life, Keitha. I just didn't know it until I saw you standing on this balcony with lightning in your hair. Tears ran down her cheeks, but they were happy tears. For the first time in 30 years, she didn't feel alone. For the first time ever, she felt complete. I love you too, she said, and meant it. I don't know how it's possible, but I do. They kissed again, and this time, the magic didn't explode outward. Instead, it turned inward, binding them together with threads of power that would last beyond death itself. When they finally went inside to complete the bonding ritual in the privacy of her chambers, they moved as one person, with 2 bodies, their separate magics already so intertwined that it was impossible to tell where one began and the other ended. Outside, the aurora continued to dance across the sky, silver lightning playing with purple void stars in patterns that had never been seen before. On distant islands, people came out of their houses to watch and wonder, not knowing they were seeing the birth of something new, something that would either save their world or destroy it. Keitha woke before dawn with Darian's arms around her and magic singing in her blood like never before. The bonding ritual had changed everything. Where once her lightning had been wild and hard to control, now it flowed through her body in perfect patterns, guided by channels that Darian's void power had carved into her very soul. She could feel him even in sleep, his presence warm and solid in her mind. Their magic had become one thing with 2 different expressions, her silver storms and his purple shadows dancing together in perfect harmony. But underneath the joy and wonder, she could sense something else, a wrongness in the fabric of reality, like a crack spreading through glass. Darian, she whispered, shaking his shoulder gently. Wake up, something's happening. His galaxy eyes opened immediately, instantly alert. What is it? The first lock. I think it's breaking. They dressed quickly and ran to the highest tower of the castle, where Keitha kept her far-seeing crystals. The magical devices let her watch events happening anywhere in the floating islands, but now they showed something that made her blood turn to ice. In the void between 2 distant islands, reality was tearing apart. The rip in space was small, no bigger than a house, but through it she could see writhing movement. Something was trying to push through from the other side, something that hurt to look at directly. How long do we have? Darian asked, his hand finding hers automatically. Minutes, maybe less. Keitha was already reaching for her lightning sword. We need to get there now. The people on those islands will die if we don't stop this thing. She looked at him, seeing her own determination reflected in his face. Ready to see if our new bond actually works? Instead of answering, Darian smiled and stepped off the balcony into empty air. For a heart-stopping moment, Keitha thought he was falling to his death. Then his void power wrapped around him like wings of living shadow, and he began to fly through the air as easily as walking on solid ground. Show off, she muttered, then called lightning to herself. The electricity answered her call like never before, flowing up from the depths of the castle and wrapping around her body in spirals of silver fire. But instead of the random, chaotic energy she was used to, her lightning moved in the patterns that Darian's magic had taught it. She stepped into the air and found that the electricity would hold her up, carrying her through the sky like a bridge of solid light. Together, they raced toward the breaking point. The closer they got, the worse it looked. The tear in reality was growing larger by the second, and now Keitha could see what was trying to push through. The hungry one was beautiful and terrible at the same time, like a living sculpture made from crystallized hunger. Its body shifted and flowed as it pressed against the weakening barriers between worlds, reaching out with arms that existed in more dimensions than human eyes could handle. There, Darian pointed toward a small island floating nearby. "We can use that as a base." They landed on the rocky outcrop just as the void lock finally shattered completely. The hungry one poured through the tear like liquid nightmares, its alien song making the very air shiver with wrongness. "Remember the plan," Keitha said, raising her sword. "You create the framework. I'll provide the power. And if it doesn't work?" She looked at him, seeing the man she loved more than her own life. "Then we die together." "I can't think of a better way to go." Darian's smile was fierce and proud. "I love you too." The hungry one had fully emerged now and was turning toward the nearest populated island. Keitha could see people running in panic as the creature's presence began to eat away at the edges of reality itself. "Now," she shouted. Darian raised his hands, and shadows poured out of him like black water. But these weren't ordinary shadows. Shaped by his will and guided by their bond, the darkness took on structure and purpose, forming a complex framework of void channels that hung in the air like a net made of crystallized night. Keitha fed her lightning into the framework, but gently, carefully, letting Darian's shadows guide her power into the patterns they needed. Silver electricity flowed through the dark channels like water through pipes, building up pressure and potential until the very air around them began to sing with contained energy. The hungry one sensed the threat and turned toward them with movements that made geometry scream. It lashed out with appendages that shouldn't have been able to exist, each one capable of unmaking anything it touched. But their combined power held. Lightning and shadow wove together into barriers that bent reality around them, creating pockets of safe space in the middle of chaos. The creature's attacks slid off their defenses like water off glass. "It's working," Darian shouted over the sound of reality tearing. "Keep feeding power into the framework." Keitha poured more lightning into the dark channels, and the framework began to contract around the hungry one like a closing fist. But the creature fought back, its alien intelligence recognizing the danger it was in. It began to eat away at their constructed prison, unmaking the very foundations of their spell. "It's too strong." Keitha gasped as she felt their carefully built framework starting to collapse. "We need more power." "Then take mine," Darian said, and opened himself completely to their bond. The rush of void energy nearly knocked Keitha off her feet. Through their connection, she could feel Darian pouring every bit of his strength into her, trusting her completely to use both their powers together. His magic flowed into her like darkness made liquid, mixing with her lightning until she wasn't sure where her power ended and his began. The framework stopped collapsing and began to strengthen. Silver electricity and purple void force spiraled together in patterns that had never existed before, creating something that was more than the sum of its parts. The prison they were building around the hungry one wasn't just made of lightning and shadow, it was made of love and trust and perfect unity. The creature's struggles grew weaker as the magical cage tightened around it. Its beautiful, terrible form began to compress, folding in on itself as reality refused to let it exist in normal space. With a final sound like the universe screaming, it vanished into a crystal of pure void that hung motionless in the air. "Is it dead?" Keitha asked, swaying on her feet from exhaustion. "Not dead," Darian replied, catching her before she could fall. "Imprisoned. It's locked in a space between spaces where it can't hurt anyone." She looked at the crystal floating in front of them, no bigger than her fist but somehow containing an entity that had been capable of eating worlds. Will it hold? Forever. His arms tightened around her. We did it, Keitha. We actually did it. They stood there for a moment, holding each other and watching the tear in reality slowly heal itself. In the distance, they could see people on the nearby islands coming out of hiding, looking up at the sky in wonder and relief. But their celebration was short-lived. Darian, Keitha said, a chill running down her spine. Look, new tears were opening in the sky. 3 of them, then 5, then too many to count. The imprisonment of the first hungry one had caused the remaining void locks to fail even faster than expected. How many more are there? She asked. Darian's face was grim as he watched the tears multiply. Dozens, maybe hundreds. And now that they know we can trap them, they'll be ready for us. Keitha gripped her lightning sword tighter. Then we better get ready for the fight of our lives. As if in response to her words, something vast and hungry began to push through the largest tear, something that made the first hungry one look like a baby in comparison. The real battle was just beginning. The next 3 days were a blur of constant fighting. Hungry ones poured through the tears in reality like water through a broken dam. Big ones and small ones, creatures that looked like twisted angels and others that hurt to see directly. Some came alone, others in groups that worked together with alien intelligence. Keitha and Darian fought them all. They learned to work as one person with 2 bodies, their bond allowing them to act without speaking, to know what the other was thinking. Before the thought was complete, her lightning and his shadows moved in perfect dance, creating prisons of light and darkness that could hold even the most powerful hungry ones. But there were so many of them. We can't keep this up, Keitha gasped as they finished trapping the 7th creature of the day. They were standing on a floating rock in the middle of empty sky, both of them swaying with exhaustion. There are too many and more keep coming. Darian nodded, wiping sweat from his forehead. Through their bond, she could feel how drained he was, how much of his life force he was spending to keep his void magic working. We need a different plan, something bigger. Like what? What if instead of trapping them one at a time, we could close all the tears at once? Stop them from coming through in the first place? Keitha stared at him. That would take, I don't even know how much power. More than both of us have, that's for sure. Not just our power, Darian said slowly. The power of everyone, all the people on all the islands. If we could link ourselves to the crystal bridges you made, use them as a way to connect to every person in the floating lands. Keitha's eyes went wide. That's crazy. The bridges weren't made to carry that kind of power. They could break, and then all the islands would drift apart. Or they could hold, and we could use the life force of everyone who lives here to power one massive spell. Darian took her hands, and she could feel his desperate hope through their bond. It's risky, but what choice do we have? At this rate, the hungry ones will break through faster than we can stop them. She looked around at the tears in the sky, counting at least 20 that she could see from here. More were opening every hour, and some of the creatures coming through were getting bigger and stronger. They had managed to trap 43 of the monsters so far, but she could feel her strength failing. How would it work? She asked. You're connected to every crystal bridge in the realm through your storm magic, Darian explained. If you open that connection fully, let your power flow through all the bridges at once, it would link you to every person walking on them, every building they connect to, every life in the floating lands. And then I use my void power to reach into the spaces between spaces, to find the source of all these tears, and we close it. Not just the openings we can see, but the place they're coming from. Keitha was quiet for a long moment thinking. It could work in theory. Her storm magic was already connected to the crystal bridges. That was how she maintained them from such a long distance. And with Darian's void power guiding her, she might be able to reach places that normal magic couldn't touch. But the risks were enormous. If something goes wrong, she said slowly. If the bridges break or the power feedback is too much, we could kill everyone we're trying to save. I know, and if we succeed, if we actually manage to close all the tears at once, the magical backlash could destroy us both. I know that too. She looked at him, this man she had known for less than a week but loved more than her own life. In his galaxy eyes, she saw the same desperate determination that she felt in her own heart. Then let's do it, she said. They flew back to her castle as fast as their magic could carry them. In the great hall, Keitha had a map of all the floating islands spread out on a huge table, with glowing lines showing where each crystal bridge connected the lands. It looked like a vast web made of light, beautiful and delicate and holding their entire world together. I'll need to be at the center of the castle, she said, studying the map. The main crystal chamber where all the bridge connections meet. From there, I can reach every person in the realm. And I'll need to be here. Darian pointed to a spot on the map that showed empty sky. At the place where the void between worlds is thinnest. It's the only location where I can reach the source of the tears. Keitha felt her heart clench. We'll be separated. If something goes wrong, we won't be able to help each other. We'll still be connected through our bond, Darian reminded her. Distance doesn't matter for that. I'll be with you no matter how far apart we are. She nodded, but fear was growing in her chest like ice. They had never been apart since their bonding 3 days ago. The idea of facing this enormous spell without him physically beside her made her feel sick. But there was no choice. They spent the next hour preparing. Keitha gathered power crystals from all over her castle, creating a circle of stored energy around the main chamber that she could draw on if her own strength failed. Darian studied his ancient books, memorizing the exact words and gestures he would need to reach across the void. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold, they stood together on the castle balcony one last time. If we don't survive this, Keitha said quietly, I want you to know that these have been the best days of my life. Meeting you, falling in love with you, learning what it means to not be alone, it's been worth everything. Darian pulled her close and kissed her deeply. Through their bond, she felt his love wrap around her like warm blankets, giving her strength for what was to come. We're going to survive, he said firmly. We're going to close all the tears, save everyone, and then we're going to have 1,000 years to be happy together. Promise? I promise. But even as he said it, they both knew it was a promise he might not be able to keep. They separated then, Darian flying off toward his position in the empty sky while Keitha descended into the heart of her castle. The main crystal chamber was a dome of pure white stone, with channels carved into the floor that glowed with the power of every bridge connection. Standing in the center, she could feel the life of every person in the floating lands, their hopes and fears, their love and joy, their desperate need to live. Are you ready? Darian's voice came through their bond, as clear as if he were standing beside her. Ready, she replied, placing her hands on the central crystal that controlled all the bridges. Power poured out of her like water from a broken dam, racing through the crystal channels and into every bridge in the realm. In seconds, she was connected to thousands of people, feeling their heartbeats like drums in her chest, their breathing like wind in her lungs. The sensation was overwhelming. She was herself, but also everyone else, mothers holding their children, farmers working their fields, merchants selling their goods, warriors standing guard. All of them linked through her storm magic, all of them adding their life force to the growing spell. Through their bond, she felt Darian begin his part of the magic. His void power reached out into the spaces between spaces, searching for the source of the tears. She felt him stretch across impossible distances, his consciousness touching places that existed outside normal reality. And then he found it. Keitha. His voice came through their bond, tight with shock. The tears aren't random. They're being opened deliberately. There's something on the other side, something intelligent, that's trying to break through into our world. What is it? She asked, even as she continued to channel power from thousands of people. I don't know, but it's big, Keitha. Bigger than all the hungry ones we've fought put together. And it's almost through. As if his words had summoned it, the largest tear yet began to open in the sky above her castle. Through it, Keitha could see something that made her soul scream, a thing of such vast hunger and alien intelligence that her mind could barely process what she was seeing. The thing reached through the tear with appendages made of crystallized void, each one the size of a floating island. Where they touched the edges of reality, existence simply stopped being. Now, Darian shouted through their bond, while it's still partly trapped. I'm going to close all the tears at once. Keitha felt him gather his power, drawing on their bond and the life force she was channeling from every person in the realm. The magical energies swirled together, her silver lightning and his purple shadows, the hopes and dreams of thousands of souls, the desperate need to survive that lived in every beating heart. The spell they created together was unlike anything that had ever existed. It reached across the void between worlds, seized the fabric of reality itself, and began to shattered glass on every island. The great thing that was trying to break through fought back, its alien intelligence recognizing that this was its last chance to enter their reality. It's fighting us. Darian gasped through their bond. The big one, it's trying to keep the tears open. Keitha felt the spell wavering as the creature's vast will pressed against theirs. All around her, the crystal channels in the floor began to crack under the strain. On distant islands, she could feel people stumbling as her magic drew more and more of their life force. I need more power, she shouted. There isn't any more. We're already using everything. The great tear above her castle began to widen again as the alien thing pushed against their spell. One of its void appendages broke through completely, reaching down toward the floating lands like the finger of a hungry god. And then Keitha realized what she had to do. Darian, she said through their bond, her voice calm despite the chaos around her. I'm going to give you everything. What do you mean? All of my power, all of my life force, everything I am. She could feel tears running down her cheeks, but her voice stayed steady. It's the only way to close the tears completely. No, his mental voice was desperate. Keitha, if you do that, you'll die. Maybe, or maybe our bond is strong enough that I'll live on in you. Either way, it's the only chance we have. She felt him reaching for her through their connection, trying to stop her. But she was already beginning the final spell. Her storm magic turned inward, gathering not just her power, but her very essence, her memories, her love, her soul itself. I love you, she whispered. I love you too, he replied, and she could feel him crying through their bond. Forever. Keitha released everything. Power exploded out of her like a star-going supernova. Every bit of energy she had ever contained, every spark of lightning she had ever controlled, every fragment of her being poured into the spell. Through the crystal bridges, the energy raced to Darian, giving him the power he needed to close not just the tears they could see, but every possible opening between the worlds. Reality snapped shut like a closing book. The great thing's appendage was severed, falling into empty space and dissolving into nothing. The tears sealed themselves so completely that not even the memory of them remained. The hungry ones that had already come through were pulled back into the void, their crystalline prisons dragged away from normal space, and Keitha collapsed to the floor of the crystal chamber, her body empty of everything that had made her who she was. Darkness. For a time that might have been seconds or centuries, Keitha existed in a place that wasn't a place, conscious but without body, aware but without form. She floated in emptiness, feeling her sense of self slowly dissolving like sugar in water. This was death, she realized, the price of giving everything to save her world. But then, through the void, she heard something impossible. Come back to me. Darian's voice, speaking through their bond, even though she no longer had a body to feel it with. I can't live without you, Keitha. I won't. So come back. She tried to answer, but had no voice. Tried to reach for him, but had no hands. She was fading, becoming less than a memory, less than a dream. I said, "Come back." Power surged through the emptiness she inhabited. Dark, deep void, power crackling with silver lightning. It was Darian's magic, but something felt different, like her own storm magic. The very lightning she had sacrificed to save the world. Through their bond, she felt what he was doing. He had taken the fragments of her power that had passed through him, the echoes of her soul that their connection had preserved, and he was using his void magic to rebuild her. Not just her body, but her essence, her very being. It should have been impossible. Life and death were not things that magic could simply undo, but their bond was stronger than death. Piece by piece, memory by memory, Darian pulled her back from the void. He used his own life force as a foundation, weaving her scattered soul back together with threads of love and desperate need. Where her storm magic had been completely spent, he filled the empty spaces with his own power, creating something new, not purely storm magic or void power, but a blend of both. Light returned first, then sensation, then the feeling of having a body again. Keitha opened her eyes to find herself lying on the crystal chamber floor, with Darian kneeling beside her, his hands glowing with the effort of the resurrection spell. "You came back," he whispered, and she could see tears streaming down his face. "You brought me back," she corrected, sitting up slowly and marveling at the fact that she could move, could think, could be again. "I felt myself dying, dissolving, and then you reached into death itself and pulled me out. I couldn't let you go." His voice was rough with emotion. "I love you too much." She reached up to touch his cheek, and when their skin met, she felt their bond settle into new patterns. The magic that flowed between them now was different, not her lightning and his shadows kept separate, but a true fusion of both powers. She was still herself, but she was also part of him, just as he was part of her. "The tears," she said, suddenly remembering. "The hungry ones. Gone." Darian helped her to her feet, and she could feel through their bond that he was telling the truth. "All of them. The tears are sealed so completely that nothing will ever be able to open them again. The realm is safe, safe." After a week of constant terror, the words seemed almost too good to be true. But when Keitha reached out with her magical senses, she could feel nothing but peace. The wrongness that had been eating at the edges of reality was gone, replaced by the steady harmony of a world at rest. "What about the people?" she asked. "I drew so much power from them. They're fine. Tired, but fine." And when word spreads of what we did, of how we saved everyone, Darian smiled. "I think they're going to want to thank us." As if summoned by his words, they could hear voices outside the castle, hundreds of them, maybe thousands. People from all the floating islands, coming to see the storm maker and void walker who had saved their world. "We should go to them," Keitha said. In a moment, Darian caught her hand as she turned toward the door. "First, there's something I need to ask you." She looked at him, puzzled. "What?" To her amazement, he dropped to one knee in front of her, pulling a small object from his pocket. It was a ring made of crystallized lightning and solid shadow, the two forces woven together in patterns that hurt to look at directly but were beautiful beyond description. "Keitha Stormborn," he said formally, "will you marry me?" For a moment, she was too shocked to speak. Then she started laughing, the sound echoing off the crystal walls like music. "We're already bonded for eternity," she pointed out. "Our souls are literally woven together. Our magic is permanently joined. What more could marriage possibly add?" "The promise," Darian said seriously. The words spoken in front of others. The choice made not just in the heat of magical necessity, but in the calm afterward, when we have time to think and decide who we want to be. She looked down at him, this man who had traveled across the void between worlds to find her, who had fought beside her to save everyone they'd never met, who had reached into death itself to bring her back because he couldn't bear to live without her. "Yes," she said simply. Yes, of course. He slipped the impossible ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, warm against her skin like captured sunlight. When she flexed her hand, the crystallized lightning and solid shadow pulsed in rhythm with her heartbeat. I love you, she said, pulling him to his feet so she could kiss him. I love you too, he replied against her lips. Forever. Outside, the voices were getting louder, more insistent. Their people, for they were both their people, now wanted to see them, to thank them, to celebrate the fact that their world would continue to exist. Hand in hand, Keitha and Darian walked out of the crystal chamber and up the stairs to the castle balcony. When they stepped into view, a cheer went up from the crowd below that could probably be heard on every floating island in the realm. What do we tell them? Keitha asked, waving to the thousands of people who had gathered to honor them. The truth, Darian replied, his arm around her waist. That love is stronger than death, that unity is more powerful than division, and that sometimes the greatest magic of all is simply refusing to give up on each other. She smiled and leaned into his embrace, feeling their joined power settle around them like a cloak made of stars and lightning. Below, the crowd was calling for speeches, for explanations, for the story of how their world had been saved. They would tell that story, Keitha knew. They would explain about the hungry ones and the failing void locks, about the ancient enmity between storm makers and void walkers that had to be overcome to forge new bonds. But the real story, the story of two lonely people finding each other across the impossible gulf between light and darkness, of love strong enough to hold reality together, that story would live on in the aurora that now danced permanently across the sky, in the way their combined magic had changed the very air of the floating realms. It would live on in the children who would grow up seeing storm makers and void walkers working together instead of fighting, in the new bonds that would be forged between people who had thought themselves enemies. It would live on in the school they would build, where young magic users would learn that differences were meant to be celebrated, not feared. And it would live on in the love between Keitha and Darian themselves, a love that had already proven stronger than ancient hatred, stronger than cosmic horror, stronger even than death itself. As the sun set over the floating islands, painting the sky in shades of silver and purple that matched their joined magic, Keitha looked out over the world they had saved and felt complete in a way she had never imagined possible. She was no longer the last storm maker, alone with her power and responsibility. And Darian was no longer the outcast void walker, rejected by his own people for caring too much. They were something new, something better. They were proof that love could conquer anything, even the end of the world. And they were just getting started. 1 year later, Keitha woke in her husband's arms as the eternal stars painted their bedroom in silver light. Through the windows of their castle, for it belonged to both of them now, she could see students arriving for the morning classes at their Academy of United Arts. Young storm makers and void walkers walked side by side across the crystal bridges, their different powers already beginning to harmonize the way hers and Darian's had. Some of them were even showing signs of natural bonding, their magic reaching for each other with an instinct that spoke of evolution itself. Good morning, my love, Darian murmured against her neck, his voice still rough with sleep. Good morning. She turned in his arms and kissed him, feeling their joined power stir to life like banked coals touched by wind. Even after a year, even after thousands of kisses, the sensation of their magic dancing together never failed to take her breath away. Classes start in an hour, he reminded her, though he made no move to get out of bed. The students can wait a few more minutes, she replied, pulling him closer. I have something more important to tell you. Something in her tone made him look at her more carefully. What is it? Keitha smiled and took his hand, placing it on her still flat stomach. I'm pregnant. For a moment, Darian was perfectly still. Then his face lit up with a joy so pure and bright that it made their bedroom sparkle with reflected aurora. Really? He whispered. Really. The healer confirmed it yesterday. She covered his hand with hers. A baby, Darian, our baby, half storm maker, half void walker, and completely ours. He kissed her then with a passion that sent lightning and shadows dancing across the crystal walls. And she kissed him back with all the love in her heart. Their child would grow up in a world where enemies could become lovers, where impossible things happened every day, where the greatest power of all was the decision to care for someone else more than yourself. It was going to be a beautiful life. Outside their window, the eternal aurora painted the sky in silver and purple, and the floating islands drifted peacefully through the void, held together by bridges of crystallized love that would never break. The storm maker and the void walker had found their happily ever after. And it was only the beginning.